The next sutta is 7.5.42. Monks, these 7 are the adornments of concentration. What 7? Right view, right thoughts, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness. Verily, monks, one-pointedness of mind, which is adorned by these 7 things, is called Aryan right concentration, with its approach just thus, its adornment just thus. That's the end of the sutta. Here the Buddha is saying that right concentration, the one-pointedness of mind, or the jhanas, if it has these 7 other things, which are the 7 other factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, or the Aryan Eightfold Path, then it is called Aryan right concentration. Without the other 7 factors supporting right concentration, it is not Aryan right concentration. Without those 7 factors, it is just right concentration. And right concentration by itself does not bring us to Nibbana, does not bring us to liberation. That is why, like the external ascetics, they practice right concentration, they attain the jhanas, but they don't attain the wisdom, and they don't attain arahanthood, just because they don't have the other 7 factors supporting right concentration. All these 8 factors of the Aryan Eightfold Path must work together. Then they give the desired effect, which is liberation. This we must bear in mind. So we cannot say that the jhanas or the right concentration is not necessary because external ascetics practice right concentration and they don't become enlightened. That is the wrong type of argument. These 8 factors must work together, and every one of them is needed. Sutta number 7.5.44. Once when the Exalted One dwelt near Savatthi in Anatta Pindika's park at Jeta Grove, a great sacrifice was being prepared for Brahmin Anguttara Sarira. 500 bulls, 500 steers, and as many heifers, goats and rams were brought to the post for sacrifice. Now Brahmin Anguttara Sarira went and visited the Exalted One, greeted him, exchanged the usual polite talk, and sat down at one side. So seated, he said, Master Gotama, I've heard this. The laying of the fire and the setting up of the pillar are very fruitful, very advantageous. And the Buddha said, by me too, Brahmin, has that been heard. And the Brahmin spoke a second time in like manner to the Exalted One, and the Exalted One replied as before. And the third time the Brahmin said, Master Gotama, I've heard this. The laying of the fire and the setting up of the pillar are very fruitful, very advantageous. And the Buddha said, by me too, Brahmin, has that been heard, for the third time. Then the Brahmin said, this unites us, Master Gotama, even Master Gotama and ourselves, yes, all in all. Now when he had spoken, the Venerable Ananda said this, forsooth, Brahmin, Tathagatas ought not to be questioned thus. I've heard that the fire and pillar of sacrifice are very advantageous. It is thus they ought to be questioned. I am indeed anxious, Lord, to lay the fire, to set up the pillar. Lord, let the Exalted One counsel me. Let the Blessed One instruct me, so that it may be for my happiness, my welfare for many a day. I just stop here to comment. You see, this Brahmin, he didn't know how to ask properly and ask humbly. He actually wanted the Buddha's advice to confirm that this sacrifice that he was going to perform would be very meritorious. But instead of asking directly this question, he said that he heard that the laying of the fire and setting up of the pillar are very fruitful, very advantageous. And the Brahmin and the Buddha said, I've also heard that something to that effect. And the second time he said the same thing, and the second time the Buddha replied as before, and the third time. So the Venerable Ananda thought that this Brahmin didn't know how to ask this question, and he advised him to ask this question properly. This applies to many people. Sometimes when you want to seek the advice of a monk, you must ask also directly what it is you want to know. Otherwise, it might not be answered, or you might be misunderstood. Then the sutta continues. Then Brahmin Ugata Sarira said to the Exalted One, I am indeed anxious, Master Gotama, to lay the fire, to set up the pillar. Let Master Gotama counsel and instruct me for my happiness and welfare for many a day. And the Buddha said, Brahmin, even before the sacrifice, a man who lays the fire, who sets up the pillar, sets up three sorts: evil, ill in yield, ill in fruit. What three? The mind sort, the word sort, the body sort. Even before the sacrifice, Brahmin, a man laying the fire, setting up the pillar, causes to arise such thoughts as, let there be slain for the sacrifice so many bulls, steers, heifers, goats, rams. Thinking to make merit, he makes demerit. Thinking to do good, he does evil. Thinking he seeks the way of happy going, he seeks the way of ill going. Brahmin, even before the sacrifice, a man laying the fire, setting up the pillar, sets up firstly this mind sort, which is evil, ill in yield, ill in fruit. Again, Brahmin, even before the sacrifice, he speaks such words as, let there be slain so many bulls, steers, heifers, goats, rams. Thinking to make merit, he makes demerit. Even before the sacrifice, he, laying the fire, setting up the pillar, sets up secondly this speech sort. Moreover, Brahmin, even before the sacrifice, he himself first sets on foot the business, saying, let them slay bulls, steers, heifers, goats and rams. Thinking to make merit, he makes demerit. Thinking to do good, he does evil. Thinking he seeks the way of happy going, he seeks the way of evil going. He sets up thirdly this body sort. Even before the sacrifice, Brahmin, a man laying the fire, setting up the pillar, sets up these three evil sorts, ill in yield, ill in fruit. Stop here again to comment. Here the Buddha is saying that when this person is making the preparation for the sacrifice of these animals to be killed, to be offered up to heaven, he does evil karma by these three ways: in thought, that means in the mind, by speech, and by body. Firstly, in the mind, when he has intention to kill so many bulls, steers, heifers, etc. Then he, thinking to make merit, he makes demerit. Thinking to do good, he does evil. And similarly, when he orders the people to kill the animals, then he makes verbal evil karma. And then the third one, when he starts the killing, usually it seems that these Brahmins, when the sacrifice is started, the Brahmin himself will be the first to kill the animal, and then he lets the workmen do the rest. So in this third way, he sets up this evil deed. So these are the three ways: through the mind, through the speech, and through the action. And this is quite relevant to us today, because just recently we had this the 8th day of the New Year, the Chinese New Year, and in Penang, I was there recently. It seems that many animals were slaughtered for offering up to Sakadeva Raja. And so these people are in the same boat as this Brahmin, actually intending to make merit. They are making demerit. Intending to get a good result of their deeds, they are getting an evil result of their deeds, so that they would have to pay for this evil deed in future. So that's why by studying the suttas, we learn to avoid the evil ways of conduct and and walk the skillful way in conduct. Then the Buddha continued, Brahmin, these 3 fires ought to be forsaken, shunned, avoided. What 3? The fires of passion, hatred and delusion, raga, dosa and moha. And why ought the fire of passion to be forsaken, shunned, avoided? With mind in passion, mastered, obsessed by passion, he takes a course ill by body, ill by speech, ill by mind. So doing, on the breaking up of the body after death, he arises in the untoward way, the ill way, the abyss, hell. Therefore, Brahmin, this fire of passion is to be forsaken, shunned, avoided. And why ought the fire of hatred to be forsaken, shunned, avoided? With mind perverted, mastered, obsessed by hatred, he takes a course ill by body, speech and mind, and so doing he arises in hell. Therefore, Brahmin, this fire of hatred is to be forsaken, shunned, avoided. And why ought the fire of delusion to be forsaken, shunned, avoided? With mind deluded, mastered, obsessed by delusion, he takes a course ill by body, speech and mind, and so doing he arises in hell. Therefore, Brahmin, this fire of delusion is to be forsaken, shunned, avoided. Verily, Brahmin, these 3 fires ought to be forsaken, shunned, avoided. So I'll stop here to comment again. The Buddha is saying these 3 poisons, the 3 defilements of passion, hatred and delusion, if they obsess us, if they control us, then we take a wrong course, and we perform wrong karma, evil karma through the body, speech and mind. And because of that, we take rebirth in the woeful planes of existence. Then the Buddha said, Brahmin, these 3 fires, when esteemed, revered, venerated, respected, must bring the best happiness. What 3? The fires of the venerable, the householder, the gift-worthy. And what is the fire of the venerable? Consider, Brahmin, the man who honors his mother and his father. This is called the fire of the venerable. And why? From it this veneration has become. Therefore, Brahmin, this fire of the venerable, when esteemed, revered, venerated, respected, must bring the best happiness. And what is the fire of the householder? Consider, Brahmin, the man who honors his sons, womenfolk, slaves, messengers, workmen. This is called the fire of the householder. Therefore, Brahmin, this fire of the householder, when esteemed, must bring the best happiness. And what is the fire of the gift-worthy? Consider, Brahmin, those recluses and Brahmins who abstain from pride and indolence, who bear things patiently and meekly, each taming the self, each calming the self, each cooling the self. This is called the fire of the gift-worthy. Therefore, Brahmin, this fire of the gift-worthy, when esteemed, revered, venerated, respected, must bring the best happiness. Verily, Brahmin, these 3 fires, when esteemed, revered, venerated, respected, must bring the best happiness. Now this wood fire, Brahmin, has to be kindled from time to time, has to be tended from time to time, has to be quenched from time to time, has to be laid from time to time. And when he had thus spoken, Brahmin Ugata Sarira said to the Exalted One, It's amazing, Master Gotama, it's wonderful, Master Gotama. Let Master Gotama accept me as a lay disciple from this day forth, as long as I live, as one gone to refuge. I set free these 500 bulls, Master Gotama. I give them life. I set free these steers, heifers, goats and rams. I give them life. Let them eat the green grass. Let them drink the cold water. Let the fresh breeze blow upon them. That's the end of the sutta. So, in the end, the Buddha is saying that instead of the 3 poisons, the 3 fires of passion, hatred and delusion, a person should venerate 3 other types of fires. The fire of the venerable, that means honoring, taking care, support of mother and father. And then the second one, the fire of the householder, is to take care of the family and the workmen, the workers, etc., the slaves, etc. And then the third, the fire of the gift-worthy, is to make offerings to recluses and Brahmins who cultivate the holy life well. And these three fires has to be kindled from time to time, has to be tended from time to time, has to be taken care of, well taken care of. And then in the end, the Brahmin took refuge in the Buddha. This is a typical case of we see in the sutta where these Brahmins, some of them being traditional Brahmins, but after they talked to the Buddha, they became converted by the Buddha and became Buddhists instead of Brahmins. And in this sutta we find that these Brahmins, they are in the habit of offering sacrifice to heaven, and their way of offering sacrifice is after killing these animals, they put them to the fire and burn them, and they worship the fire. And because of that, they even up to today, they still Brahmins are in the habit of keeping a flame burning 24 hours a day, and 365 or 366 days a year. And even up to today, if you go to the banks of the Ganges in India, you find some temples where they have this fire burning continuously every day. And if a flood comes, they will quickly take the flame onto higher grounds so that the flame is not put out. The next sutta is quite a good, important sutta. It's 7.5.46. The Buddha said, "Monks, these 7 thoughts, when made and increase in, are very fruitful, of great advantage, plumbing the deathless, having the deathless as their goal." What 7? The thought of the unattractive, the thought of death, the thought of the distaste or clawing of food, the thought of all world discontent, of impermanence, of dukkha in impermanence, of no self in dukkha. Verily, monks, these 7 thoughts, when made and increase in, are very fruitful, of great advantage, plumbing the deathless, having the deathless as their goal. Monks, the thought of the unattractive, when made and increase in, is very fruitful, of great advantage, plumbing the deathless, having the deathless as its goal. Thus is this said, and on what score is this said? Monks, when a monk lives much with the thought of the unattractive heaped around the mind draws back, bends back, turns back from falling into sex ways, is not distended thereby, and either equanimity or disgust is set up. Just as a cock's feather or piece of gristle or cartilage thrown on the fire draws back, bends back, turns back, and is not distended. Even so, when a monk lives much with the thought of the unattractive heaped around the mind draws back, bends back, turns back from falling into sex ways, and is not distended thereby, and either equanimity or disgust is set up. Monks, if while he so lives, the mind flow after sex things, or sensual things, if relish be set up, the monk must realize this. Not made become by me is the thought of the unattractive. Not by me is there a progress from the old state to a better. Not won by me is the fruit of making become. Then surely he is thoughtful. But if, while he so lives, the mind draw back, bend back, turn back from falling into sex ways, and be not distended thereby, and either equanimity or disgust be set up, he ought to realize this. Made become by me is the thought of the unattractive. I have progressed from old to a better state. I have won the fruit of making become. Then surely he is thoughtful. Monks, the thought of the unattractive, when made and increase in, is very fruitful, of great advantage, plumbing the deathless, having the deathless as its goal. Thus is this said, and it is on this score it is said. Monks, the thought of death, when made is very fruitful. Thus is this said. And on what score is this said? Monks, when a monk lives much with the thought of death heaped around the mind draws back, bends back, turns back from longing for life, and is not distended thereby, etc. Monks, when a monk lives much with the thought of the distaste or clawing of food heaped around the mind draws back from craving for taste. Monks, when a monk lives much with the thought of all world discontent heaped around the mind draws back from the garishness or attractiveness of the worlds. Monks, when a monk lives much with the thought of impermanence heaped around the mind draws back, bends back, turns back from gains, favours and flattery, and is not distended thereby, and either equanimity or disgust is set up. Just as a cock's feather or a piece of gristle thrown on the fire draws back, bends back, turns back, even so the mind, when a monk lives much with these thoughts heaped around the mind draws back from gains, favours and flattery. Monks, when a monk lives much with the thought of dukkha or ill in impermanence heaped around the mind, and lethargy, indolence, languor, idleness, carelessness and disregard come, a lively sense of fear springs up as a slayer with drawn sword. Monks, when a monk lives much with the thought of there being no self in dukkha heaped around the mind is free of ideas that make for I and mine. As to this conscious body, as to all outward signs, is beyond the vanities or conceits, calmed, wholly liberated. Monks, if while he so lives, the mind be not free of all such ideas, nor wholly liberated, the monk must realize this. Not made become by me is the thought of there being no self in dukkha. Not by me is there a progress from the old state to a better. Not won by me is the fruit of making become. Then surely he is thoughtful. But if, while he so lives, the mind be free of ideas that make for I and mine, as to this conscious body, as to all outward signs, be beyond the vanities, calmed, wholly liberated, he ought to realize, made become by me is the thought of there being no self in dukkha. I have progressed from the old state to a better. I have won the fruit of making become. Then surely he is thoughtful. Monks, the thought of there being no self in dukkha, when made become, made an increase in, is very fruitful, of great advantage, plumbing the deathless, having the deathless as its goal. Thus is this said, and it is on this core it is said. Verily, monks, these 7 thoughts, when made become, made an increase in, are very fruitful, of great advantage, plumbing the deathless, having the deathless as their goal. That's the end of the sutta. Here in this sutta, the Buddha is telling us about the 7 types of contemplations that we ought to ought to think about. The first one is the thought of the unattractiveness of the body, or loathsomeness of the body, and this helps us to reduce our lust, our sensual desire. And if we find that we have not progressed, if we find that we are still attracted, then the Buddha said we must be thoughtful. We have to cultivate it more. But if after cultivating it, we find that the attraction of the opposite sex is not so strong, then you realize that you have progressed from an old state to a better state. And the second one is the thought of death. The thought that any time death may come. Then if we continually make this contemplation, then the mind turns back from longing for life. The third one is the thought or perception of distaste of food, tiredness of food. And we practice this constantly, and then it helps us to draw back from craving for taste. And the fourth one is discontent for the world. If we realize that the world is not so attractive, then we draw back from the attractions of the world. Then the fifth one is the thought of impermanence. If we practice this constantly, then the mind draws back from gains, favours and flattery. And then the sixth is the thought of dukkha in impermanence. If you cultivate this, and then one day, if the mind becomes lethargic, indolent, becomes careless, then a lively sense of fear springs up to remind us that dukkha is like a slayer with a drawn sword. And because of the fear, then we become careful again. Then the seventh one is the thought of there being no self in dukkha. And if we practice this anatta, the perception of no self, then the ideas of I and mine pass away. So these 7 thoughts, 7 perceptions are quite important. This is Sutta number 7.5.47. Now Brahmin Janusoni visited the Exalted One and said to him, "Does Master Gotama profess to live the holy life?" And the Buddha said, "Brahmin, of whomsoever speaking rightly one may say, he lives the holy life unbroken, without rent, untarnished, without blemish, whole and pure. Of me verily, speaking rightly, may he say it. For I indeed live the holy life unbroken, without rent, untarnished, without blemish, whole and pure. But what, Master Gotama, is the breaking, rending, tarnishing blemish of the holy life?" And the Buddha said, "Consider, Brahmin, some recluse or Brahmin professing to live the holy life in full, who in sooth falls not so far as to couple with women folk, yet enjoys being rubbed, massaged, bathed, shampooed by a woman, relishes it, longs for it, and is entranced thereby. This indeed, Brahmin, is the breaking, rending, tarnishing blemish of the holy life. This man, Brahmin, is said to live the holy life impurely, bound by the bond of sex. Nor is he freed from being born, aging, dying, from sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, despair. He is not freed from ill, I say. Again, consider some recluse or Brahmin, who in sooth falls not so far as to couple with women folk, nor enjoys being rubbed, massaged, and so forth. Yet he jokes, jests, makes merry with them. And then again, though he do none of these things, yet eye on eye burns for them, stares after them. Again, though he do none of these things, yet he listens to them as they laugh, talk, sing or weep beyond the wall, beyond the fence. Again, though he do none of these things, yet he remembers the laughs, talks, jests he had with them before. Or though he do none of these things, yet he watches some layman or layman's son bent on, engrossed in, reveling in the 5 strands of sensual pleasure. Or though he do none of these things, yet he lives the holy life in hope of a deva body, thinking, by this virtue, vow, penance, holy life, I shall become a deva, or one of the deva host, relishes it, longs for it, is entranced thereby. This indeed, Brahmin, is the breaking, rending, tarnishing blemish of the holy life. This man, Brahmin, is said to live the holy life impurely, bound by the bond of sex. Nor is he freed from being born, aging, dying, from sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, despair. He is not freed from ill or dukkha, I say. And so long, Brahmin, as I continue to see one or the other of these 7 sex bonds in myself not got rid of, I professed not to be wholly awakened to the highest and full awakening, unsurpassed in the world with its devas, maras, brahmas, on earth with its recluses, Brahmins, devas and men. But when I saw no bond of sex not got rid of, then I professed to be wholly awakened to the highest and full awakening, unsurpassed in the world, unsurpassed on earth. Then to me knowledge, insight arose. Immovable is my liberation by mind. This is my last birth. There is no more becoming here again. And when he had thus spoken, Brahmin Janusoni said to the Exalted One, "It's amazing, Master Gotama," etc., etc. And he became a lay disciple of the Buddha. That's the end of the sutta. So here the Buddha is describing the various stages of how this bond of the opposite sex can a monk can cling to. Here he talks about a monk who enjoys being rubbed, massaged, bathed, shampooed by a woman. This cannot be a Buddhist monk. This probably could refer to a Brahmin, because Brahmins were originally supposed to be renunciants, but later, because they were taken to be advisors of the kings, they were given a lot of landed property and given slaves and even wives and other property. So some of them, they would enjoy being rubbed, massaged, bathed and shampooed by a woman. And even if a monk does not do this, yet he could enjoy joking with women. And then again, even if he does not joke directly with women, he likes to stare at women. And then even if he does not do all these things, yet he likes to listen to them as they laugh, talk or sing, beyond the monastery wall or beyond the monastery fence. Or even though if he do none of all these things, yet he remembers the laughs, talks he had with women before. Or if he does none of these things, then he likes to watch some laymen enjoying the sensual pleasures. Or lastly, he may hope to be reborn as a deva. These are all gradations of the bond of attraction of the opposite sex. In the holy life, in the monk's precepts, the first one, in other words, one of the most important ones in the monk's precepts, is the precept against sexual conduct. In Christianity, this would be called the vow of chastity. A spiritual life is the giving up of sensual desires, and of all the sensual desires, the sexual desire is the strongest and is the cause for rebirth. Towards the end of the sutta, the Buddha mentioned that immovable is my liberation by mind. In other words, the Buddha is saying here that he was liberated by mind. And in the Majjhima Nikaya, number 71, the Buddha says that he was liberated by mind and liberated by wisdom, which means to say that a person who is liberated by mind is also a person who is liberated by mind and wisdom. Because in the description of the 7 types of Arya, the first one is mentioned as a 2 ways liberated Arahant. And then the second one is liberated by wisdom. So there's no mention of liberation by mind. So from here we can know that liberation by mind is equivalent to liberation by mind and liberation by wisdom, which is a 2 ways liberated Arahant.